Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Spooney Scrapbook. I'm Mike Kenichi. He's John Sponheimer, and we've been doing this thing for a little while now. We have a lot of fun with it, and we look forward to talking to you again today. And Coach, thank you for coming on again.
It's great to be here again, Michael. The season's moving along, and it's great to talk high school football.
Yeah, congratulations, by the way. Great game that it was last week, and back and forth, but you guys pulled it out. So that was probably one of the biggest wins, I would say, in Ansonia's history, because, I mean, it was a tough one.
Well, it was one of our more highly contested, certainly regular season games. The score went back and forth and changed hands at least 7 times, I believe, including 5 in the second half. Um, I'm not sure how much benefit it is to the health of our coaching staff, but we were very happy to come out on top and hopefully to move on.
Right, and Coach, I know there's been quite a few freshman games this year, and how are the freshmen making out?
So freshmen are been playing combined, so just one game by themselves. A number of combined games with the sophomores, and they've been playing very well in virtually every game they played. They've been successful in every game so far that they played.
That's good to hear. I'm sure we're gonna see you guys in the playoffs as usual. So a few more games to go, but it looks like Ansonia will be back there again.
Well, based on the amount of teams, especially this year, who are going to make the playoffs, and what our record is now, it seems like we have a very fine opportunity to make the playoffs and to hopefully make a run.
And do you like that format, Coach? I mean, do you like how they're adding more teams to the playoffs, or I mean, would you prefer? I know it's been like I think 6 the last few years, and then it was 4 at one time. I like the 4. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the 6 making it.
Well, now I mean now they've. It's funny, when I started out, there were what, 8 teams that made the playoffs, and now there are 48, I believe. There's 6 classes of 8 each, but no, I mean, I think 48 is a little bit too many in a state the size of Connecticut. You're going to be having football teams 6 and 4 making the playoffs, sometimes a number of in a division. I thought 32 was the right number with the 4 divisions and the 8 teams, but people can say, well, you guys always make it, so it's better for some of the teams that don't get a chance, and that's a valid argument to some extent. But I just think with the size of the state of Connecticut that 32 is a sufficient amount of football teams for the playoffs with the 4 classes.
Right. So, Coach, I think we finished up with 1978 last episode. So at this point, Ansonia's won 3 state titles in a row. It's obvious you could see they're building a winning tradition and a dynasty in Ansonia. So talk to me about 1979, because that was another good year and some hard fought games that season as well.
79 was a very special year for us for a number of reasons, but primarily because we lost one of the greatest classes in Ansonia football history. We came back and we had almost no starters returning. We had, I believe, 1 starter on offense and 2 starters on offense and 1 on defense. One of our captains, who was a great emotional leader, a kid named Ray Roberts, who unfortunately has passed away. He was a captain, hadn't even started until he was a senior, which was extremely unusual. And not we weren't given much of a thought as being a strong team that year. We really started out, and to win on a weekly basis was just even more exciting because we weren't considered a favorite in the North Valley League. We were considered not even the best team in the Valley, and all of a sudden things started to go our way. We had a kid named Joey Potter who was also passed away, went on to have a Hall of Fame career at Brown, who became a quarterback for 1 year for us. He'd been a defensive back and a wide receiver the year before. He only came out for football as a junior at Ansonia, and he had just a fantastic year. And we went to the playoffs, and we came from behind to beat Naugatuck when Joey broke his collarbone, and Timmy McNamara came off the bench and led us to victory up in Naugatuck. And we came from behind in the last quarter, and then Joey Shea was a sophomore. We played Seymour in the state finals with the great Edwin Essen. We were behind 14-0 down in Bridgeport, and it looked like we were just going in the tank. He had no chance to come back. And one of the greatest comebacks that I've ever been involved in as a coach over all the years I've been here in Ansonia. We scored 4 touchdowns in the last half to go on to win what I consider one of the maybe 2 or 3 greatest wins we've ever been involved with at Ansonia High School.
Yeah, and I believe that was Coach Heffron's last game as coach of Seymour. I think he kind of passed it over to Coach Sponheimer the following season. So, I mean, there was a lot riding on that game for Seymour. I mean, I'm sure those kids were hyped up and energized, and they wanted to win it for him as well.
I'm sure they did. They had a tremendous team. As I said, Edwin Esselman was only a junior then. I actually think he was a better player. He was healthier as a junior than he was as a senior. And he was one of the great running backs that we've ever faced at Ansonia. And it was a win that those of us who were involved in will always remember.
Right. And Coach, that was the 4th straight title. And it's funny because different programs have different goals. And I know back when the Hoosie teams played, their big thing was win the Hoosie. Whatever happens after that, that's a bonus. And you guys always wanted to win the MVL, but the goal every year was always to win a state title or compete for a state title, correct? That was number 1.
Absolutely, Mike. Once the playoff system came about, it was important to win as many games or every game we could, but nothing was more important under our scheme of things than to win a state championship.
Right. And it's funny how things work out because I mentioned to you early on, I'd always heard the rumors that they wanted to fire Coach McAllister early on in his career. And now it's amazing how a difference in like 8 years, because the guy had just won his 4th straight title at Ansonia, and he become like the right up there with Boots Jarvis as a legend in Ansonia.
Oh my God, I hate to make a little slight change, but it wasn't the 4th straight one because we lost the Amity in '78.
That's right. Okay, so 3 out of 4. Yeah,
we won 3 out of 4, and certainly he was a great coach, Bill McAllister, obviously, and one of the great coaches in Connecticut history as the run he made in the last 8 years, and certainly with the playoff system where he won 6 of 8 championships, and that was eight championships in a row that he was in. So that doesn't happen to too many coaches.
Yeah, and I mean, he was a phenomenal coach, but what I really liked about him, and Jack followed, I mean, I know Bobby came after McAllister and then Morrell for a year, and then, of course, Jack. But it seemed like Bobby and Jack always followed Coach McAllister's formula, trusting their assistant coaches. And McAllister was big on that. He trusted you guys. Bobby was good with that, and Jack was excellent with that. Like, they knew that, you know, they didn't have to do everything by themselves. They could trust their coaches. And that really started with Coach McAllister.
It really did. We were very close with him, and Bobby had played for him, and we were together from '73 on, and you know, and sometimes we just thought the same way at the same time. So the continuity was certainly there. Right.
And losing to Amity in '78 and then coming back and again beating Seymour, and like you said, you were down 14-0. I mean, that had to just, I mean, obviously kids don't forget losses. I get that, but that had to really like take the sting away of that unfortunate loss the previous season.
Well, I don't know if it totally took the sting away, but it certainly made us feel very, very, very rewarding. It was very rewarding. That's the next year, especially because it was a Valley rival, and further especially because we came from behind 14-0 to win the game.
Right. So let's talk about 1980, Coach. And I believe in the 80s, and if I'm off, I apologize, but I believe you guys won 7 state titles in the 80s, which is just remarkable when you think about it. I mean, it really was the decade of Ansonia football. But talk to me about the 1980 season, because again, now you guys, like, you go from this team that's trying to fight to get Ansonia back to a winning tradition, and now it's expected every year that you guys got to win a state title, and that's not easy for coaches or kids to have that pressure every year.
Yeah, in '80 we had a very good football team. We had 2 outstanding running backs. One was Billy McAllister, Bill's son, who was a senior by then, who had incidentally scored 4 touchdowns against Seymour in the championship game the year before, and a boy named Jeffrey Johnson. We had a great lineman, and David Grackman was an all-state player then. We had a tremendous young safety and wide receiver, David Lee. Joey Shea was our quarterback. We had some outstanding linemen like Chris Ventry, Joe DiVincenzo, Bobby Musto. All these guys, many of these guys had played on the '79 team, and we had a year we went undefeated, and we had a great game with Derby, as it turned out that year. We were behind down in Derby, 12-0. Bill McAllister was out for that game. He was technically going to be allowed to play starting next Monday. We were hoping that we could somehow get the clearance, but they just wouldn't allow it. And just as the game started, a torrential downpour came down, as wet and rainy as any game I think I've ever coached in. And Derby was playing great, and as I said, they went up 12-0. We came back in the second half and scored again, and we got the go-ahead extra point on a tipped extra point pass. I think the rain helped us a little bit on that because it was so wet. The ball went through the Derby players' hands, and we happened to catch it, and we won the game 14-12. But it was amazing the number of people that even stayed throughout that game, considering how wet it was. But you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The rain was so bad, and the rain did not start until about 2 minutes after the kickoff, I remember.
Yeah, and the thing about that Derby game, Coach, and this just goes to show that you could throw out all records back then when Derby and Ansonia played, because Derby had a down year that year. I think they finished 5-5. It wasn't one of their better teams, but
exactly.
They always came to play Ansonia, and that game is it's on YouTube, and I would encourage anybody to watch it, because I even think a guy that you coached against for quite a few years, Tom D'Onofrio, scored an early touchdown in that game as a junior. I mean, a very underrated receiver, but it was just a classic game between two teams, and like you said, it came right down to the wire. And I mean, you could see the play where the Derby kid, it looks like he batted it away, and then the Ansonia kid caught it.
Mike, we were very fortunate to win that game.
Yeah. And Coach, so talk to me about what were some, I know the Derby game was obviously a tough one, but what were some of the tough games you had in that 80 season?
Naugatuck was very good that year. We played very well in that game. We also, Shelton was fairly tough then. That was the first game that Bob Riggio came in, and he was starting just to get the program was pretty decent the year before. They had beaten, as a matter of fact, Amity to break Amity's winning streak in '79. Shelton did, but Holy Cross, we were playing them, and they were a very good team, and very, very unfortunately for us, on Thanksgiving we were playing very well, and Billy McAllister made a great play, and all of a sudden he got tackled and he got hit and had a knee injury, which had to be operated on the next 2 days later, and he missed the state finals. In the state finals, we played Newington, and they beat us. I mean, and not to make any excuses, but Billy McAllister's injury certainly didn't help us, but Newington outplayed us and deserved to win the game. But it was a team that went undefeated. Matter of fact, we started that year, because that was one of the, every now and then you'd play an extra game. In '74 and '75, you played 11 games, and in '80 you played 11 games, and we played Amity. And I believe Amity ended up tying for the Housatonic League title that year with Seymour, who won the state championship. That was Paul Sponheimer's first year. They beat Hand. I believe Amity and Seymour, might have been another team. I think they tied, but we beat Seymour in the opener. I think it was 20-0 or 28-6, but something along those lines.
Yeah, and Coach, you talked about McAllister missing that game, and he missed the Derby game that year, and you kind of always feel bad, and that's the unfortunate thing about football sometimes is kids who have great careers, and then something just goes wrong, they get injured, and it's a shame that he had to miss two of the biggest games that year, one against the rival Derby, and then, of course, the state championship game. That's the part of football that could be isn't always rewarding for a kid who's worked hard all his career.
It can, and all teams have to grapple with injuries. I've seen devastating injuries, which have hurt other teams along the way also. So it befalls all of us, and it's just extremely unfortunate for the player first and the team second when that happens.
Yeah. Coach, one of the things before we get to 1981, I wanted to talk to you about, and I think it came out in like the middle 70s, but talk to me about how important Cable 10 was to Valley football, because I mean, they would kind of showcase those kids every Sunday night, and those kids got to watch themselves on TV. The coverage was great. I know when I think of Cable 10, I'll always think of Ed Clemens and Buddy Chernovitz, because that's who I grew up with. But I mean, you had some great guys calling games back in the 70s, and they did a great job with the coverage of Cable 10. And it really was a great thing for Valley sports and for high school kids in general.
Cable 10 was fantastic, Mike. It really was, for coaches. And in those days, too, there wasn't the exchange of films you get on Huddle right now the same way. You'd be trying to grab a film from another coach and trade him films and things like that. It was great to get a chance to see your opponent on film such as that. But for the kids who got a chance to see themselves on Valley Cablevision, and that thing ran for 20, 30 years, it was fantastic. I remember I had moved into the condominiums in Derbyshire in 75, and I was livid because they didn't have Cablevision, and I couldn't get cable, Valley Cable, and but I always found someplace to go watch it. But it was a great treat, and Buddy and Ed Clemens just did a fantastic job.
Yeah, and the thing about Ed Clemens too, Coach, what probably a lot of people don't realize is he would go to coaches that week, whatever game was being played. So say Derby was playing Ansonia, he would meet with the Derby coach on a Wednesday, the Ansonia coach on a Thursday, and those coaches trusted him enough to tell them what they were going to, do on offense and on defense. And never once did he give any of the information away. He waited till the day of the game when it was being telecast, and that's very important because you have to build the trust, and he was excellent, I thought, with that, because he never shared the information that was given to him.
It was a show that was way ahead of its time, to be honest with you. It was special.
Yeah, it really was.
And Buddy Chernovitz was the high school when I was a sophomore, helping keep the bench warm at Notre Dame when they were number 1 in the state. Buddy Chernovitz was a quarterback there and had a fantastic year. So he was someone who I went back with in the early 60s, but his analysis of the games were tremendous also.
Yeah, and he was very entertaining. I mean, he was always good for mispronouncing names, which was very funny. But when I watch, even now when I watch a game here and there, it's just amazing to me how smart Buddy was. He knew football. I mean,
he did.
He knew what they were coming.
Did.
Yeah, he was very good at, and you need that type of person to be the analyst of those games, because people want to be told what's going on. And I thought he was excellent when it came to that.
You're right.
Yeah. So, Coach, 1981 season, and what I really like when I look back on the 81 season and I watch some of these games, they have the great Thanksgiving game against Naugatuck. That was a classic. You guys started quite a few sophomores that year, and you could just see that something special was going to happen in the next few years at Ansonia. So talk to me a little bit about 81 and some of the players from that team.
Well, 81 was a team which was a very solid team. One of our sophomores was Earl Stanley, who was a fantastic freshman football player the year before. And he broke his ankle more or less the third, I think the second or third game of the year. We missed him the rest of the year, which put us a little bit behind the 8 ball. But we had Terry Antrim was a great player. He was a junior. Michael Norfleet played some in the backfield. Joey Shea was a senior. David Lee was a senior wide receiver. He was hampered a little bit by knee injuries or ankle injuries. He was an all-stater 2 years in a row as a safety, and he went on to Syracuse to play up there for 4 years. He was one of the better players in the state at the time. He made some great plays. And we had Dougie Gomez there, who was also a junior fullback. But interestingly enough, the Derby game that year was again one of the wildest games I've ever been a part of coaching. If I can guess on the score,
I think it was 40 to 31.
43 to 35 maybe, or something like that. I don't know, 40 to 31 maybe.
Yeah.
But I know we scored one touchdown when we took a handoff in the backfield. I think John Kostowski got into the backfield, somehow took a handoff from the Derby player and ran about 60 yards for a touchdown with it. But we laughed because we joked, and Bobby Orcano had such a great game for Derby. We said that he was so tired from running for so many yards against us, he had nothing left in his legs in the last 5 minutes because he ran for about 500 yards against us that day with kickoff returns and everything else. But and that game propelled him to become the player of the year in the state of Connecticut. But we were very fortunate to come back and win the game. And then we played Naugatuck, and Naugatuck ended up being the #1 team in New England that year.
Yeah.
We had beaten them 8 years in a row. We were up there, and there was a huge, huge crowd. And we went back. We scored on the first offensive play of the game that we had the ball, and went back and forth. And they kicked a field goal, and we scored late, but we ended up losing 24-21. And then Naugatuck beat Xavier, who was an undefeated team from the New Haven area, the Middletown area. Naugatuck beat them 28-6 in the final. So Naugatuck was a very, very good team. And incidentally, the week before we played Naugatuck, I believe, they beat Holy Cross, who had a tremendous team also, by the same exact score. I think they beat them 24-21, I believe. It could be off. But and we had beaten Holy Cross earlier in the year. So it was a disappointing year as far as losing to Naugatuck after we had beaten them so many times. But we did go on to win the state championship, and that started our run of 4 consecutive state titles in the 80s.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, 81 through 84. Yeah. And Coach, let me ask you, again, you never like losing to any of these teams, and it's not fun losing to Naugatuck. But I would think at the same time, when you see 1 or 2 teams from your league win a state title and then you win a state title, it's got to make you feel good as a league that these guys are winning. So I would think when you're not playing them, you're probably rooting for them because you want to see them win, because it benefits the league when everybody's winning.
Absolutely. We were very happy to see Naugatuck win that game.
Yeah. And let me ask you, Coach, you talk about the Naugatuck series and stuff. And I mean, I was kind of reflecting back, thinking about this series. And from 1986 to 2022, I think Naugatuck's only beaten you guys 4 times. And that's just hard to believe. And that's just a credit to the Ansonia program, because you are talking about a double L school. And there have been some great games over the years. But I mean, for Ansonia in a 30-year period to beat that team as many times as they have and only lose to them 4 times, that really is remarkable. And I think sometimes that gets a little unnoticed, but that shouldn't, because that's really a great accomplishment.
Well, those of us who have been involved in it, Mike, are very, very proud of our history with Naugatuck, and we certainly hope to get back on. It's funny to say get back on the winning track when you've won so many, but we did lose last year, so we really feel that it's important for us to win that game this year, and hopefully we will.
Right. So, Coach, let me ask you, let's talk a little bit about 1982, because 1982, again, you guys had a tremendous year, and you played Derby twice, which we'll get to that in a second. I think only 1 loss that year, and it was to Naugatuck again. You talked about Earl Stanley. I think he had a great junior year that year. There was the other kid in the backfield. Was it Antrim? Was it Terry Antrim?
Who was a first-team registered All-State running back that year.
Yeah, and he was tremendous. And, I mean, just a great 82 team. And, I mean, I know you guys lost to Naugatuck, but that was a team that, like I said, you had some kids who started the year before. And, I mean, you could just see that these kids were going to be a winning team. I mean, you could just see it from the start.
Well, it's interesting, Mike, because that Derby was back to being the best team in the Houstonic League at the time. Yeah. I think we came in to play Derby down there, and I think both teams were undefeated, and that hadn't happened. I don't know if I'm trying to think if it ever happened when I was coaching.
Maybe 75. or 76,
No,
maybe.
not with both teams undefeated.
Right, you're right.
We weren't undefeated.
Yeah.
And Derby had a very good team, and they're led by Ron Bartone, who was probably the best lineman in the state. And we went down there, and it was a barn burner, but we prevailed down there on a Saturday morning in Derby, and I think it ended
21-0.
13-0.
I think 21-0.
And then we scored one more at the end, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. But Derby, I saw Derby losing the last seconds that year to Cheshire, a game I thought Derby had the game won, and unfortunately got a bad call or something, a penalty or something. But we knew all along that we'd be playing Derby. We thought we'd be playing Derby again in the playoff, and losing to Naugatuck in the game before Derby. That was one of the more bitter losses we've ever had. We went ahead with 1:56 seconds to go, 6-0. Didn't make the extra point. Naugatuck had an outstanding team also. They lost one game early on, but they were really rolling then, and they had some real big, tough players up front. And they came down and scored and made the extra point with 20 seconds to go, and we were number one in the state that time. And again, it's funny because not only were we chasing a state championship, but those of us who have been around knowing what it was to finally beat Derby, and there was always the other thing over our head that Sonia's never been number one, and they never will be number one. And whenever we only controlled our own destiny twice, and all of a sudden we lost again. So that was being bandied around, if you might imagine that. But then we had to go and try and get ready from the bitter loss to play an outstanding Derby team. And that was a game which had one play which changed the history of Ansonia. Well, I didn't say change the history of Ansonia football, but it was one of the more interesting scenarios, I think, ever in the Ansonia Derby game. There was no score going. It was the last play. I think it was the last play of the third quarter. Derby had, I think, 4th and goal, maybe from about the 7-yard line. I could be off a couple of yards here or there, maybe the 10-yard line. Maybe we pushed them back. I know they were knocking on the goal line, and they sent the field goal. Maybe they could have made another first down because they sent the field goal team on, and I thought if they made the field goal, they went up 3-0. And we had been really struggling offensively the whole day, and but all of a sudden took timeout, and out came the offense. And because we had a goal line defense in, we rushed an extra player, and an end who would normally be dropping off in pass coverage rushed because it was still a goal line defense, and he hit the Derby quarterback from behind. The ball came out, bounced around a little bit. We had a lineman pick it up and run about 80 yards for a touchdown. So instead of us being behind 3-0, we were all of a sudden up 7-0.
Yeah.
And then later in the last quarter, Terry Antrim broke about, I'm going to say, a 50-yard run. I'm just guessing, was over the right side for another touchdown to give us a little bit of breathing room. But we've always talked about we wonder what would have happened if Derby made the field goal. And it's all speculation, obviously. But we were on the ropes. There was no doubt about it. And to have that play turn things around is something which was never forgotten by us who were there.
And Coach, I always say that that's a no-win situation for the coaches. I think the kids, because they're kids, they embrace it. They want to play each other, and I'm sure the Ansonia kids wanted to play Derby again. But for you guys as coaches, it's a no-win situation because you know how hard it is to beat them once, and then to try to prepare and beat them twice. It's just it probably had to be the worst week mentally for you guys as coaches.
Well, it was the worst. Both times it was very, very difficult because we had finally beaten them the first time, and all of a sudden if we had lost, it would have taken all the joy of that away. And the second time, we were just so crestfallen about losing to Naugatuck, losing the shot at number one, trying, even though it was still Derby, we had already beaten them once. So we ended up winning by 3 touchdowns, even though the game was much closer than that. And to get people to believe we were going to be in a scrape again, we had to gut it out, and it was a tough week, but somehow we were able to prevail and move on.
Yeah, and then, Coach, I mean, obviously the Naugatuck loss, I know that's hard. It was hard to take. You wanted to be number one. But when you beat Derby twice in a season, I mean, for players and coaches, you can't really ask for anything better than that, especially when it results in a state title.
It certainly soothed a lot of our feelings, to be honest with you. But and we had so much respect for Derby, and obviously Coach DiFilippo was his last game he coached.
Yeah,
and we he did so much for high school football from Connecticut, but especially Derby and the Valley. I mean, he was a legend, and it was such an honor to coach against him and to be involved in some of the unbelievable football games we were with him during the time that I had an opportunity to coach. He was a special man. He was a special man.
Yeah, he really was. And I mean, those were, again, for fans in general, I mean, that was people's lives. I mean, in the Valley, especially Derby and Sonia, I mean, games were on Saturdays then. And I mean, you always had something to do on a Saturday. And I mean, you really can't ask for a better way to kind of start the month of December than having a game between two rival teams like that. I mean, for Valley sports and high school sports in general, it was just magic.
You're right. And coincidentally, 3 years apart, we played Derby in '76, Seymour in '79, and Derby back in '82 again. So it added a little extra juice to the playoff for all 3 of those games.
Yeah, Coach, let me ask you this, and down the road, we will definitely talk about it more. But one of the things that I'm sure bothered you guys as Ansonia coaches was the 94 and 95 teams that you had, and you finished number 2 in the state. Cheshire finished number 1. And I always felt like high school should have found a way to have those 2 teams play. And I really believe that, this is just my opinion, number 1 should never be decided by opinions or writers or stuff like that. I really think if somebody's number 1 and number 2, they should really play for the championship. What are your feelings on that?
Well, unfortunately, Mike, that could never happen, because you'd have to get to that point.
Yeah.
And who would be the ones deciding who was number 1 and number 1? Because sometimes the arithmetic formula just wouldn't do it. I mean, I'd love to do it in 1977. We were number 1 going into the state finals. When Olszewski came back, we played Trinity Catholic, who lost to Trumbull 9-6, I believe, in the week before in the FCAC playoffs, and we beat them 19-7, I think. Trumbull beat Hamden 21-20 in the state finals, and Trumbull jumped us for number 1 in the states that year, and we really thought we got treated somewhat unfairly by this couple of sports writers from Fairfield County. And in '94, '95, we felt we were as good as anybody. But Cheshire was in the throes of its winning streak, and they had great teams too. So somebody has to finish second, I guess, even if you both go undefeated. And unfortunately that happened. But we were number 2 so many times in '76 and '77. We were still number 2 in '78. We were number 2 in '94,
95, yeah. 2003, I think. I mean, I think you guys were number 1 to start the year in 2003, and after a few games, they put New Britain ahead of you guys.
What happened was that New Britain beat a team from Massachusetts 42-0 as a variant, and they jumped us. And that team 2003 was probably as good as any Ansonia team we've ever had.
Yeah, and it doesn't take away the championships, Coach, and it doesn't take away what those teams did.
No, exactly.
It's just unfortunate, because I even think Jack made a comment in the paper after the '03 season. He said, I had this great team for 2 years. They went undefeated, but I feel like they kind of got cheated a little bit. They never got that chance to be number 1.
Yeah, well, that's why 1983 became so much of an important year to all of us because that's when we finally got it. And again, when the reference to Derby being state champs twice and number one, and you guys never got it, you can say what you want in the Ansonia, but it was hanging over a lot of people's heads. And to come and get it that year after coming so close the year before, and the way we did in the last through the playoff system is something that was extremely rewarding to all of Ansonia football.
Well, Coach, we're going to hear all about that on the next segment we do. We're going to spend a lot of time on that 83 team. But I want to thank you for coming on again. It was nice to cover 1979, 80, 81, and 82. And I really appreciate this. And this is a lot of fun. And I look forward to keep doing it.
I enjoy it very much, Michael. And for the two of us as Yankee fans, we have plenty of free time right now anyway. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, we could have a whole show on them. But you know what?
No, we're not going to do that, Mike.
Why ruin the night? So,
that's right. We just have a little more free time to do things now.
Well, thanks again, Coach. I will see you soon, and we will go over 1983. And thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, Mike, and the same to you.
Appreciate it. And, of course, that was Spooney's Scrapbook. That's Coach John Sponheimer. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.